Member of the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committees, Republican Congresswoman Martha McSally of Arizona. She's a retired United States Air Force colonel. Also with us, BBC correspondent Kim Gaddis. Congresswoman, let's begin with you. You've been in the Air Force. Tell us, are airstrikes alone enough to defeat ISIS?
Well, we first need to unleash American air power to actually go after their command and control, their leadership, their logistics, power supply. We've got to treat the Islamic State as a state. We are mired in this mindset of counterinsurgency, which we've been doing for over a decade now, but they've declared themselves as a state, and that's a strength of theirs, but it's also a weakness. We've averaged a little bit less than 15 strike sorties a day over the last 15 months. To over 1,000 a day that we had in Desert Storm, and even in other operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Kosovo, much higher rate of unleashing air power. We have unrealistic rules of engagement, and we have pilots going home with the munitions. So we've got to first use air power for all it brings to the fight in order to put them on their heels, cut off their command and control capabilities, their resources, their logistics, their war-fighting capability, their ability to basically export terror in the region, and we're not doing that right now.
Congresswoman, I've had generals inside the Pentagon tell me that this is a phantom air war, that there may be 8,000 sorties, but 2/3 of the times they come back without dropping bombs on any targets. Why is that?
Well, it's because the rules of engagement are so overly restrictive because of this counterinsurgency mindset. We have very solid procedures. I've been involved in airstrikes from flying my own A-10 to commanding a squadron and then overseeing our operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the laws of armed conflict are very clear. We don't target civilians. We do everything we can in order to limit civilian casualties. But if you have a legitimate target that is actually going to meet your objectives, to destroy a war-fighting capability, leadership, command and control, everything I just listed, then you should be able to hit that target. Right now, if there's the potential for one civilian to be hurt, they actually don't allow them to hit that target. Perfect example, over the weekend, the A-10s, the AC-130s started to finally strike the oil trucks. For, over 15 months, we have been avoiding because we didn't want to hurt the drivers. And in this case, we dropped leaflets to warn them before we struck them. These are clearly legitimate targets that are providing millions of dollars a month to fund terror. And we're allowing ISIS to continue to fund their terror and actually kill tens of thousands of civilians, creating a failed state, exporting terror the way they're doing, because we're afraid of hurting somebody in a fuel truck. This is absolutely ridiculous. We need to unleash air power for all it's going to bring to this.
Well, the Secretary of Defense said earlier this week in an interview he had with Mika and myself that is a rule of engagement that has changed. They are now aggressively going after fuel trucks. I expect them to continue to do that moving forward. Kim Gaddis, let me ask you a question about the mindset of America's allies in the Middle East. Obviously, as you stated earlier this week, this is not just an attack on Western civilization. This is an attack on Beirut. This is an attack on Arabs across the Middle East. This is an attack on Sunni Arabs, on Shia Arabs. There has been concern, we've heard it around the table, that there are several Gulf state allies of the United States and several Sunni Arab allies of the United States that don't want to get involved in the type of fight and the type of coalition that Hillary Clinton was talking about before, because they don't trust American leadership. They don't trust us to stay there. Can you tell me whether those concerns from diplomats actually reflect what you hear on the ground? And if that is the case, why is it?
Well, I think one of the issues here is that the goals of the coalition, or the goals that this coalition has led by the United States, don't quite chime with some of the goals of America's regional allies. For the longest time, and probably until today, Saudi Arabia's primary goal was really to see President Assad be removed from power. Their priority was not ISIS. Same with the Turks. They thought ISIS was a useful foil, for example, to push back against Assad, which was also their priority, get him out of power. Now that we're seeing that the group is reaching out to Europe, conducting attacks in Lebanon, conducting attacks in Egypt by bringing down the Russian airliner, now is perhaps the time to convene the allies and say, okay, we have to prioritize and we have to make ISIS the key target at the moment. We understand that you're also concerned about President Assad. This is how we can do these two things in parallel.
Congresswoman, let me ask you about the refugee issue here in the States, because earlier I'd said that some of President Obama's aloofness and being small in his response to backlash to the refugees led to some of the xenophobic comments. And what I meant by that was saying instead of being sympathetic with the concern here, the real sympathy that concern a lot of people have in the States about having people from the Middle East, refugees, come to the U.S. and live here, instead of explaining to them, here's the process, it takes 2 years. I think a lot of Americans don't realize that the vetting process is as intense as it is, that he really missed an opportunity there. Given the vetting process, are you still not satisfied with it, and what more needs to be done?
Well, I serve on the Homeland Security Committee, and in March, the chairman appointed me to a task force for combating the flow of foreign fighters and terrorists. It was a bipartisan task force. We worked for 6 months trying to identify what are the real threats that ISIS is going to pose with the travel of foreign fighters through a variety of different vulnerabilities and loopholes, and homegrown extremists, those that are being radicalized in place. So one of the 32 findings which we have in our book, which I brought here as a prop, which you can get on the Homeland Security website, addresses the potential gaps in vetting related to the refugee program. One of the 32 findings, but there are many others in there. We had FBI Director Comey and Secretary Jay Johnson testify before the Homeland Security Committee that there are certainly potential gaps in the vetting process because it's only as good as the information that we have. Now, ISIS has said that they want to try and use the refugee process to potentially infiltrate, and the fact that we have our highest security officials saying, look, you can, to quote Comey, you can query the database till the cows come home, but if we don't have good information in there on their backgrounds or information, obviously, from the states, then, we do have gaps. So I think it's legitimate, and we're hearing from the American people, we've got to close that gap. But that's only one of many gaps we have to close in order to stop the flow of foreign fighters and to stop homegrown extremism. I think we need to be very strategic and measured, not fear-mongering, but actually really addressing this issue in a strategic way.
All right, Congresswoman Martha McSally and Kim Gaddis, thank you all.